Okay, so welcome. Resistance Live, 27th of January, 2025. I'm finally testing negative for COVID, but not feeling 100%. I want all of you to know that I know that there is like a fire hose of nonsense coming at us right now. And I personally will just tell you that I am with all of you, that it is very, very difficult to kind of like deal with the reality of where we find ourselves right now. And I want to spend a little bit of time today talking about it. I also want to spend a little bit of time just trying to figure out how we can all make a difference. And I have some thoughts on that. And I also want to remind you all that the whole point of all of this is where I started before I realized that I couldn't be heard anywhere. The whole point of all of this is that they want us to be afraid and isolated and terrified and unable to respond because it's too much, so that all of what's happening can continue to happen because it benefits them and their never-ending quest to remain in power. So one of the things that I just want people to be mindful of here is that they're doing all of this for a point, and they're doing all of it so fast for a point. It is not something that is just randomly happening. They're actually doing this with the intent of trying to silence, speaking of silencing, trying to silence and trying to keep us all isolated and alienated and alone. So we had a lot of ways to go here in the context of how to handle this, and a long time to go, unfortunately, until we're in a place where we can actually like shift the narrative. But I do want to remind you all that we're not powerless. You know, I was in a class this morning. And well, before I get to that, let me just do the basics. Okay, today for our visually challenged viewers, I'm wearing a blue top. It's kind of like sky blue. My hair is down. My thick gold hoops are in. I'm a pink-skinned, green-eyed, dirty blonde-haired woman, and I am in front of my bookshelf and my yellow standing cart and the big cushy chair behind me. And I'm coming to you, as always, from occupied Muncie, Lenape, and Mohican land. Okay. So this morning, we had our final class for the first cohort of the Dual Power Accelerator, which, by the way, is open for registration for the second cohort right now. I'm gonna like drop it down in the banner, and I'll put a little notification up here at the top when we're done. And you know, one of the things that we were discussing is why this is all happening. And one of our students made a really astute observation, which I just think, you know, is honestly like the mantra for these times, which is essentially like, if we were powerless, they wouldn't be working so hard to stop us. And I want everybody to kind of sit with that for a minute, because when you think about all the things that they are doing right now to try to stop diversity and inclusion initiatives in their tracks. This morning, he's signing an executive order banning transgender troops in the military. Everything that they're doing to try to shut down NIH. Everything that they're doing to try to shut down any dissent, right? All the roundups. They're doing all of this because they know that collectively we are way more powerful than they are. And one of the things that I just want people to remember is that they know that even when we don't, right? They know that even when we don't. And I really want everybody to kind of like remind themselves that collectively we actually are incredibly powerful. We just have to figure out how to organize and how to use the power that we have. So, all right. First things first. On Friday night, Trump attempted a purge. He attempted to fire a whole slew of inspectors general, and he cannot legally do that. And in fact, this effort to try to fire these inspectors general even caught the ire of some Republicans, because it usurped the authority of Congress. Essentially, in order to fire inspectors general, you have to give 30 days notice to Congress that you're planning to do it, so that Congress can take action. And essentially, like they can't be removed anyway. So this whole thing has really caused, at this point, quite the kerfuffle, because by Saturday morning, the Council of Inspectors General had sent a letter to the Trump White House saying, you've run afoul of the law. You're actually not allowed to do this, and had hired legal counsel. Plus, on top of that, there's this congressional ire about it. And apparently this morning, all of these inspectors general showed up for work. So once again, the thing that I have to kind of remind you all of is that just because Trump says it's some way, or that it is this way, whatever way he designates, doesn't actually make that true, nor does it make it the inevitable outcome, all right? And I think one of the things that's very dangerous in this era is that we're finding ourselves in this place of like hopelessness. Like the New York Times is writing that like all resistance is gone to Trump. Congressional resistance, people resistance, resistance in any given community, vanished. That's their take on it. It's a lie. I mean, and Rachel Salas here in the comments, and she was this weekend in North Carolina with Leah Greenberg, the head of Indivisible, and they had like hundreds of people at every event. Okay, so one of the things that I just want people to remember here about this as well is that we are seeing in real time lots of pushback. And there was more on this yesterday, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, in the context of what happened with Colombia yesterday. Okay. Which we all need to kind of understand because, by the way, the U.S. news has not been reporting on this very accurately at all, if they're reporting on it at all. And so keep in mind that just because he says something doesn't make it true. Just because he does something doesn't make it legal. And just because he says that's the way it's going to be doesn't mean that's going to be the actual outcome, right? Mariam Kaba said something really interesting over the weekend also that I want people to be aware of. She said, because we don't know the future, we don't know what's going to happen. That means that your own actions could have impact, right? Because we actually don't know what's going to happen next. We don't know what's going to happen a week from now or 2 weeks from now or a month from now or 6 months from now. The things that you do could actually have a positive impact on the trajectory of ongoing events, all right? Really critically important to remember that. All right, so the other thing that has happened is that Trump is essentially, we talked about this a little bit last week, but banned all DEI initiatives across the government. Over the weekend, the DOJ stopped all civil rights actions, and there's now going to be impact as well to the EEOC, which is an agency where actually I spent my first summer as a law student in the general counsel's office. So one of the things that this means is essentially that, you know, the pursuit of civil rights through the Department of Justice has stalled. That does not mean that there are not civil rights actions that can be taken under state law. It doesn't mean that state attorneys general are not going to take up the lead on this and do more. It also doesn't mean that there's an end to like equal employment opportunity under state law. Okay, so this is the benefit of this. This is the federal government doing this. It does not mean that nationwide every state has stopped it as well. All right. And there's going to be arguments about this. I will tell you right now, with some of this stuff, there's going to be serious debate about the Equal Protection Clause. I will tell you that I think this thing about transgender troops being banned in the military is going to be ripe for an instant court challenge because people are going to lose their jobs. So again, keep remembering that these things are not necessarily as they appear when he executes on them, all right? Somebody asked a question about what's the impact of ending DEI initiatives in the government on corporate America? Well, unfortunately, one of the things that we've seen is that there's been a lot of capitulation in advance. So Target announced over the weekend, late last week, that they are ending all DEI inside the company. They are also terminating these various programs that they've had to cultivate Black and brown creators and sell their merchandise inside the stores. I know a lot of people aren't going to like to hear this, but there's a huge boycott Target thing happening right now. It is not just for Black and brown people. It's for everyone. I will tell you, I am not planning on giving them any of my money anymore. Like, period. And the other thing I will just say here is that Costco, on the other hand, had an enormous, overwhelming shareholder vote to continue DEI initiatives there. And have historically been incredibly good on DEI. So if you're looking for a place to kind of spend your money for things that you would ordinarily get at Target, may I suggest Costco? I'm a big Costco fan anyway, but that's another story. So there already is quite a bit of corporate capitulation. Now, there may be a connection between these two things because the other thing that Trump did, we talked about this last week, was terminate DEI in all government contracts, which is going to have a really big adverse impact on women and minority-owned businesses. But if some of these companies had relationships with the government and government contracts with them, that would be a basis for them to arguably terminate DEI in advance. But I'm going to tell you, if you're pushed over so quickly with that feather, there's something wrong with you as a company to begin with. So I want people to kind of like think very carefully about where you're going to spend your money right now, because economic boycotts really can have an impact. And Target has taken a major hit to the point that they're actually putting out press releases now claiming that it's not really what it looked like. So please stay abreast of this, right? Because the other thing I'm going to remind you of is that when companies end DEI initiatives, and I'm going to remind you all, like before the pandemic, like 75% of my work was related to DEI. It was like women and minority talent leadership programming in corporate America, okay? When they terminate this stuff, it means that their boards are less diverse. Their decision makers are less diverse. They're less likely to actually be able to market effectively to communities that are not made up of white people, right? They lose the diversity of experience that actually makes companies more profitable. There's been a lot of studies about this. So choosing to do that, choosing to end DEI initiatives when you are not obligated to do that simply because Trump has given you permission to do that tells you an enormous amount about the leadership of the company and also about where they're going in the future. So I would just encourage everyone to put your money where your mouth is. I'll just say that. All right. All right. Let's talk for a second about what happened with Colombia yesterday, because this is important and significant. And there's also like quite a bit of disinformation out there about this. Okay. So to understand how this whole thing started, I mentioned on Friday that Trump had pulled into play military aircraft to start deporting people out of the United States. These are like C-17s, I think is the correct terminology of it, which are people carriers that are normally used for the military. And they have been deporting people in chains. I wish this was different. They are literally deporting people in handcuffs and in ankle cuffs, chained together on airplanes. And there is reporting out of Central America that they are beating people who are being transported who do not comply. Okay. So a plane landed in Central America over the weekend prior to this whole kerfuffle with Colombia. And quite contrary to what you would know if you were only looking at American news, there was quite a bit of news coverage of what happened to the migrants who were on this deportation flight when it landed, including like cameras that met it. They showed up covered in bruises, cuts. You know, there were obvious indications that they had been constrained in ways that were like very unpleasant. Okay. And this went out all over the news in Latin America. Then two flights actually, from the United States to Colombia on U.S. military aircraft were turned away. And I have to say that, you know, like reminder here, it's not like Colombia has not been accepting deportation flights. They have quite a number, actually, including under Biden. The objection here was about the treatment of the people on the plane and the fact that military aircraft was being used. When Colombia turned away the two planes, Trump lost his mind, threatened 50% tariffs on Colombia. That would have been like the end of most of our coffee supplies and a lot of our cut flowers. Claimed that the U.S. Embassy in Bogota was not going to approve any more travel visas to the United States, that any family members and people who'd been involved in turning away the flights were going to be banned from traveling to the United States. Just absolute temper tantrum, toddler level foreign policy decisions. Horrifying. Then the president of Colombia wrote an absolutely scathing post about how he doesn't shake hands with white enslavers and how the blood that runs through Black rebellions that were turned into slaves by the United States also runs through the people of Colombia. He, quoted Gabriel Garcia Marquez and said an awful lot of things about how the only people who he would bow to are the Black and white farm boys of America. Incredible, incredible piece. Now, here's where all the confusion began. Then he sent the presidential plane to Honduras. Now, this is where things started to get a little messy because people were like, oh, he caved. More on that in a minute, unfortunately. But what he actually did, so after one of these flights was turned away, Trump's jets, like military aircraft, dumped the plane load of deportees in Honduras. Just left them there. And by the way, that flight did not just include people who were destined for Colombia or from Colombia. It included people from all over Latin America. So they dumped a plane load of people in Honduras. And the president of Colombia took the presidential plane of Colombia and sent it to Honduras to pick up his people. Okay, which everybody first said, oh my goodness, he's capitulated despite this incredible thing that he wrote on social media. And he also said, by the way, that he was going to levy contradictory tariffs against us as a result of what Trump had done. So this whole thing got to a very high level very quickly last night. Woke up this morning to Trump saying, now I'm going to remind you of everything that I said at the very beginning here about like, you can't trust what this man says. Okay. Saying like, basically that Trump had said, we've resolved everything. Colombia is going to accept flights. Now, one of the things that we have yet to see is one, whether or not that's actually true. Two, whether or not Colombia is going to accept people who are literally shackled together. And three, whether or not they're going to accept military aircraft. Now, the indications this morning are that they're going to accept military aircraft, but we have yet to see what happens here. This is a mess, like an absolute mess. And I have to say, like, the hypocrisy of it should not be lost on anyone, that Trump is claiming that we are being invaded while he is expecting to be able to dump plane loads of people, whether they're from a given country or not, in a country that he designates when he feels like it. So let me just point out one other thing here, because I know a lot of people were very pleased to see, for instance, Mexico turning away a flight late last week, Colombia turning away 2 flights over the weekend. SUBSTACK, by the way, which is the council, essentially it's like the EU for Latin America. The president of Colombia is about to ascend to the presidency of SUBSTACK, and they've called an emergency meeting to address Trump's deportation flights. So this story is not over, like, at all right? But one of the other things that people have to remember here is that if deportation flights are turned away and Trump doesn't have anywhere to kind of like dump human beings, like, please, let's not forget these are human beings. Some of them are people who have been picked up and their children now have no parents in the United States. Okay. If these flights are turned away, and they are turned away eventually from all Latin American countries, the end result is going to be camps, which, by the way, are already being built in some states in the United States. So there is kind of no good outcome for this for the people who are actually on the planes. And one of the things that we all need to be thinking about right now is like, how are we going to respond, much like AOC suggested last week, when prison camps come to our towns, when prison camps are being built in our towns, right? What's it going to look like from the standpoint of nonviolent protest? What's it going to look like from the standpoint of resistance? Because I can tell you right now that if the CELAC nations decide that they're not accepting any more flights, the end solution is going to be putting people in camps, but quick. And that's already happening because we already have detention camps. So please keep in mind here that, like, this is an unfolding story. And I also just want to point out that there's nothing wrong with the president of Colombia deciding to accept a plane load of Colombian citizens, right? I'm sure he would rather, he's got like kind of a serious progressive history, by the way, long story about him and an accused affair with a transgender journalist and how he handled that. And he compared transphobia to Nazism. Long story. Anyway, there's nothing wrong with him saying, I would rather have Colombian citizens back in Colombia than have them in detention camps in the United States. All right. So we have to have kind of like a whole understanding here about the complexity of this situation, because it's not simple. It's not simple. And like I said, there is no good outcome for the people on the plane. So, so keep in mind that this is an unfolding story, but I will just add one thing. For anybody who's been like, why aren't we talking about Trump's mental state? Why aren't we talking about his decline? I just want to point to what happened last night. He started what would have been a devastating trade war that would have driven Colombia, by the way, into the arms of the Chinese as a trading partner, because he didn't get his way. That's not normal. It's not sane. It's not rational. And then on top of it, yesterday, he said something along the lines of, well, maybe we will actually just like return to the WHO. So just keep in mind that there's nothing about this that is going the way that it should. Real, okay, everybody understand that? Like, there's nothing about this that is normal. There's nothing about this that is like rational or usual or sane. Okay. All right. Speaking of deportations, we got to talk about ICE. So there were a whole series of raids over the weekend, everywhere from Puerto Rico to Boston to Chicago to San Diego. It's a very dire situation for some of the families of people who were rounded up. And we can expect to see more of this. Apparently, Trump is not happy with the number of people that were actually detained. And so now he's setting quotas on the number of people who have to be detained by ICE. That means that raids are going to increase. So if you want to know my sense about this, I would encourage you to go back and watch Friday's broadcast when I talked about like bystander intervention training and the importance of knowing what you're doing in the context of when something like this comes to your town, so that you are very clear on what you can't and should not do in that event. Okay. You need to get involved with local immigration rights organizations on the ground where you live. But it's going to get increasingly ugly. I mean, that's kind of all there is to say about it at this point. Okay. Let's see. Trump has frozen not just hiring, but all work, essentially, at NIH, CDC, the FDA, and this includes, by the way, the weekly morbidity and mortality results reports that have been relied upon by doctors for decades to determine where medical risk lies, essentially. Someone asked this morning on the Patreon feed whether or not this could be stopped. And the unfortunate fact is that because all of this is under the purview of the executive branch, absent an attempt by Congress to address it and to deal with it and to put a bill on his desk, which he would then veto, probably not. Okay, so I want to give you guys a word of advice here, okay? Reminder, not all health information comes from the federal government. And this would be a very good moment, just like many of you did during the heart of the COVID pandemic, to get on the email list for your state-based and local departments of health. Because even if the federal government isn't tracking information, the state and local departments of health may be doing so. Not in every state. We all know that this was very inconsistent during the heart of the COVID pandemic, right? Red states just stopped tracking things. There's a whole kerfuffle in Florida where like DeSantis didn't want anything being tracked. So do what you can to stay in the loop, because by the way, like bird flu is a thing. There's no eggs on the shelves in lots of parts of California right now because of bird flu. And there's growing indications that like there may be some concerns about bird flu being able to move through the air, meaning like from birds. So you want to kind of keep an eye on this, even though, you know, there's obviously like not an ongoing bird flu pandemic. There's a lot of concern about it. And the fact that the federal government is not tracking any of this right now, putting out any information on it, doing any research, is of grave concern. But this is a moment to kind of like empower yourself with the knowledge coming out of your state to the extent that you can. And by the way, like, you know, if you have a neighboring state that you know is doing better at this, you might want to get on their mailing list as well. So keep going. You know, again, there are ways around this, and we've got to really rely on the agencies that are there to do it right now. Okay, Kristi Noem is now officially the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. She was voted through on Saturday morning. This went entirely under the radar this weekend for reasons I don't understand. And there were some Democrats who voted for her. I got a lot of questions this morning on the Patreon feed of like, why would this particular senator vote for her? And I can't answer that question. I mean, I think we've kind of lost John Fetterman to the void. I'm not really sure why, but I will tell you that, you know, I've never, as many of you know, I never really liked that guy. But nonetheless, something's going on there. Okay. I'm deeply disappointed to see like my senator, Andy Kim, vote in favor of her confirmation. The only thing that I can tell you all is that I think some of these senators are picking their battles. Now, that said, there's no reason for them to vote for one of Trump's nominees, right? People might be saving up their fire for Kash Patel. I don't know. But I will tell you that this is something that isn't ideal. Understatement of the year, not ideal. Okay. So let's just talk for a second about how to cope with all of this, because there were a bunch of questions on the feed this morning about like how to have hope in these times. And one of the questions that was asked of me also was, is his base even hearing about this? You know, do they know about all the abominable things that he's doing? I have to remind you all that they like this. Okay. This is what they voted for. Does everybody remember the RNC with those signs that said mass deportation now? They knew this was what was going to happen and they like it. So they don't see all of this as crimes against humanity, which forced deportations are, right? They don't see all of this as, you know, actions taken to destroy the United States when he kind of like threatens Colombia with 50% tariffs that are actually going to be paid by American consumers. They don't see it through that lens. All right. So you can't expect that his base is going to kind of like magically wake up at one point and be like, oh my God, this is really bad. Because inevitably, by the way, when these things come knocking on their door, Trump and his people are going to be there to say, like, it's not our fault. It's the fault of, the immigrant who came over the border who took your job. They're armed for bear for this, like pun intended. And they're not, the base is not going to have some like aha moment of like, oops. I mean, never say never, but I think it's highly unlikely in the near future. So as far as having hope in these times, I got to tell you guys that I think the real answer to this is like community. And I know this is like an ongoing theme that we've talked about on this broadcast quite a bit in the last month. But if you are not in community with like-minded people, you're really going to struggle with how to cope. One of the things that came up again this morning in our final call for the first cohort of DPA was exactly this issue, that there are people in that course who are blue dots in red states and have partners who just want to like stick their heads in the sand and not deal with any of this. And the only way that people are getting through it, and let alone continuing to move forward to mobilize and make a difference, is by the community that we built. So yes, you should get in on it. Like, I'm not going to say that. I would love to have all of you in the class, and you should get in on it because registration closes a week from tomorrow. And again, I will like drop a link up here. But one of the things that I want people to just remember here is that if you do not have like-minded people around you who see everything the way that you do and who accept that what's happening is unacceptable, it's going to be very hard to have hope. However, if you are in community with people, even if they're not necessarily people who like you're standing around talking about politics with 24/7, but you've got like a community pod of people who get together for dinner and take care of each other, and maybe they're all like-minded, but it doesn't always have to be all Trump all the time, you will feel cared for. You will feel like you are seen and understood. And that's something that we all need right now, right? You will feel better if you volunteer some time with an organization that's helping people out. You will feel better if you go to dinner or lunch with people who see things the way that you do, even if you don't spend the whole time talking about this absolute shit show, right? You will feel better. And it doesn't have to be something dramatic right now. Small actions, right? Like, I just have to remind you all that small actions lead to big change. A politics of caretaking, organizing from the ground up, making sure that people have what they need to survive, making sure that people have environments where they feel safe, where they're not just getting like financial and physical resources, but emotional resources. This is how we build resilience to keep going. So the best advice that I have is to get in community with like-minded people. And it doesn't have to be anything big. Like, it can literally be like a coffee once every couple of weeks. But, potlucks are great. Community gardens are awesome. Creating your own initiatives to help people who need it where you live, fantastic. Volunteering at organizations that are already doing that, primo. But do something, because the thing of hopelessness is actually what fascists want, okay? Like, if you allow yourself to wallow in hopelessness, you're letting them win. Like, I hate to put it in those terms, but it's true. Okay. Like, somebody else said this. I think it was like, I can't remember who it was. It might have been Anna Gifty over the weekend, said, doomerism is not a strategy. Doomerism is not a strategy. All hope is lost is not a strategy to help people survive. And the moment for doomerism now is like over. Like, by the way, like, that corner has been turned. Last week, I think, turned the corner on that for a lot of people. Because in the face of everything that we're facing down, I think everybody understands that the one thing that will allow it to continue is saying all hope is lost and refusing to do anything about it. So it's time to find something, a mutual aid group, a community pod, right? An organization that's helping immigrants, an organization that's helping people secure abortions, like a local abortion fund, or clinics. Like, they still need clinic volunteers up here in my town that are doing that work every Saturday morning at the local clinic. Like, find something that will put you in community with like-minded people and do it, and understand that like the small steps over time are building blocks to a better future. All right. And if you need additional inspiration, go read Rebecca Solnit's Hope in the Dark or A Paradise Built in Hell. Great books that talk about exactly how to face down what feel like unfaceably bad circumstances. That's not a word, but you get my point. Make sure that you are understanding, again, as I said, kind of like at the top of the broadcast before I got my sound fixed, or after I got my sound fixed, that they wouldn't be fighting so hard to stop us if we didn't have power. Period. Okay. So get to work. And, if you like this broadcast, I would appreciate a like. If you're watching on the replay, drop a replay into the comments for me, please. And, I'm going to remind you all, again, Dual Power Accelerator. Fantastic community. Everybody from the first cohort is sticking around for the second one. So you have a ready-made community there of people nationwide who are doing incredible work, where they live to try to make a difference in people's lives. So I hope you'll think about getting in on that. And, you know, as always, please subscribe, hit that bell notification, share this broadcast if you think it will be of benefit to people. I'm going to try to edit out the first 5 minutes so that nobody has to watch my nonsense messing around with my faulty microphone. And I will catch you all here tomorrow at regular time. All right, everybody. Thanks so much. Hang in there. I know it's rough, but like, we're going to get through it. We just have to organize. All right. That's really what it comes down to. We got to organize and be in community with one another. All right. Lots of love, everyone. I'll see you soon. Bye.